handout for today. Okay. All right. All right. So today we're talking about the typical gardening favorite crops for most people. I'm most likely going to cover some things you already know. Hopefully, there's some tidbit in here that you might not know. I'm open to questions at any time throughout this, so feel free to interrupt me. Questions are my way to get to learn something new if I don't know it. So yes, we're going to kind of go through this. There's a lot of information. So the goal today is to just kind of talk about some of the core components of growing tomatoes and peppers, and everything that I talk about will be centrally located around natural practices. These are based upon my own experiments, my own practices, and what I find over the last 5 years has really begun to work for the average person. As I feel, and most of us may feel this way, that time moves faster and things seem to just always be busier in this day and age. So, my goal is to create ideologies and things that can help be successful for people without a lot of time, because that's definitely me. So, here you guys go. Oh, you're good. I wouldn't. Somebody's always late, so it's no big deal. So, okay. Always. We were trying to not be a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about types and varieties, a little bit about preparation, planting, care, not so much about harvesting because I feel that's the easy part. But harvesting is important because it draws us back to some of the beginning principles of this talk. I'm going to touch mostly, this talk is specifically targeted today because fall tomatoes and peppers are coming up. And timing is the most important factor of growing these two things. More or less on tomatoes, timing has got to be dead on. When we deal with pests and disease, when it comes to growing things in the nightshade family, timing is usually the root cause of most problems, as well followed secondary by soil. So we'll get into those things. So if we're choosing varieties, obviously we've got some decisions to make. And I know this is a simple concept, but I think it's very important because I find that the average person that comes and I work with them in the retail setting of things, they get what somebody else told them does well. And that's all fine and dandy. You can get a lot of information from your neighbor, your fellow gardener, but it does not mean it's going to work in your specific setting or your specific space. So we've got to look at, number one, what are we growing for? Are we growing for production? Are we growing as a hobby? Like, production doesn't really matter. We're just trying to see if we can maybe accomplish this. Are we actually trying to get something and put it up? I also bring up, this because some of these choices circle back to the concept of sustainability. So as gardeners, I feel that we have a responsibility not for sustainability of the environment, but for sustainability of ourselves. How many of you have decided you're going to grow something at some point in time, and then you planted a whole bunch of something, and then when it all got done, you were like, why did I plant so many? Like everybody's done that, right? And so, because at the same time, like you don't have this concept. We don't think long enough in today's world to like really think, how much am I actually going to get out of this? And we think we need all this stuff, and then we overplant, we underutilize our space, and then we're laid out and we only end up using half of what we harvested anyway, or we're not prepared to actually do something with it. And that's a big thing. So experimenting, being specific about our variety so that we're choosing something that fits our needs. Obviously, if we want like the best tasting tomatoes that we can get, heirlooms are awesome. But heirlooms are not well suited for the environment here. They're hit or miss. Even the best and seasoned of growers I find will tell me that one season is amazing. It's like their other standard tomatoes, and the next season is slim to none. They're not adapted because open pollinated varieties, they developed over very long periods of time, so they're not changing and developing as fast as the environment is changing here, and that's why hybridization is a thing. So hybrids are, you know, man's way to take the best traits of certain open pollinated varieties and combine them in a natural way so that we can speed up evolution of plant species and get things that actually are suited for our environment. Could you imagine if we didn't have tomatoes that were disease resistant, or like blight resistant, or even somewhat heat resistant in this climate right now? Like, we live in such a niche climate. We're coupled with some of the worst combinations of environment, and they lead to disease and pest pressure so much easier than other places where it's easier to grow, but they may only have one season. We're lucky enough to be able to do this twice. So if we fail one time, at least we got a second chance. So, hybrids are going to bring in some of the, the best qualities like disease resistance, nematode resistance. So if your soil food web is not very robust, you have varieties that might be able to combat some of the things that can't change overnight. We also have to determine what type we have. So there's indeterminate and determinate. Determinate being more of a bush variety, so smaller, compact growth. And when it comes to a sustainability standpoint, determinates put on almost all their fruit in one window. So if I'm not prepared to handle my full harvest all at once, then that might not work out. Now, on the other hand, indeterminate, plant's going to grow much larger. It's going to produce longer into the season, but it's going to produce a heck of a lot more. So in turn, I'm going to have even more production. So weighing those factors out, and I always put these in this presentation because if you go to the nursery, this is even a better example. This tells me crap, nothing. Like, it tells me what kind of tomato it is. Like, then, you take the, the mass-produced tags like this. This tells me the abbreviations for the disease resistance. After 21 years, I don't know what any of those mean without looking them up. But these don't tell you anything about whether these are determinate, indeterminate, their growth habits. They don't tell you whether they're hybrid. Some of them do. If you see one that's marked with F1, it's an F1 hybrid. But here we have like celebrity. This isn't even the right tag for this variety. This is the improved celebrity because you can't get the originals anymore. But point being is the tag doesn't always tell you all the information. So spending a little time, when you go and you buy something, take the time before you just grab it and go to the checkout and make sure it's going to fit your space and what you're actually after. Obviously, we have different sizes of tomatoes. Interesting enough, like smaller tomatoes, like cluster type tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, will tend to be the thing that will produce the longest into the season. They tend to be able to handle the heat a little better, and you will see production fall farther into the late summer than you will with larger and medium size tomatoes. Peppers are primarily going to be, a combination of both as well, heirloom and hybrid. Most of your common varieties of things are heirloom. Peppers are a lot easier to find, some decent heirlooms, and heirlooms actually perform well, unlike tomatoes. And that's always interesting to me because you think of a plant that comes from the seed that looks identical to the tomato, it's from the same family, but yet the growing season is not the same. It's not, it can handle more heat than, say, the tomato. Peppers can survive for many years versus a tomato. Trying to keep one alive for more than one season is very, very difficult. So it's very interesting when you compare that to like fall season, when every single thing you plant, the seed is the exact same thing. It looks the same. It loves the same temperature conditions, growing conditions for the most part. So this family of plants is very, very unique and is very, very finicky. Most all of your peppers are going to be determinate. There are such things as indeterminate varieties, but they're not indeterminate in the vining sense. One note that I like to put out for people, obviously, we can get sweet hot peppers, mild peppers, but hotter peppers grow slower, so they might not always make the best choice for fall planting. If you've ever bought even something simple as a habanero, and you notice if you compare it to the bell pepper next to it on the shelf, it's almost always larger. The bell, like the milder peppers, they tend to grow at a slower rate. They tend to produce at a slower rate. And one unique thing, which I have no scientific data to back this up, but it's just an observation from my own trials, is that milder peppers in the summertime tend to become more thirsty. They'll wilt faster. They like more water. I don't know why that is, but it's something I've seen a lot of in the last 4 to 5 seasons. Almost always my mild peppers require more water and inputs than the hotter peppers. So just something, maybe one day somebody will come back and tell me, hey, you're full of it, or maybe I'm seeing the same things. So when it comes to preparation, there's not really a lot of fancy preparation that goes into planting these things. For me, the most important thing about preparation is being prepared. Most people don't plan their garden out anymore. I feel like planting the garden was like an old timers thing. I never watched my grandfather just like haphazardly plant anything anywhere like I do. So my goal is to encourage people to spend more time thinking and planning than actual doing. I can say from my own experience that I've become more successful as I've done this because I'm less rushed. But timing when it comes to these guys is impeccably important because, as we know, in spring, if we don't plant them early enough, what happens when it gets too hot?
They stop producing, they wilt, they get bugs eating them.
Yep. So you get stress, you get pest pressure, you get disease pressure because it's getting hot, the humidity's ramping up. Now we're moving into fall. We have to look at it from the opposite perspective. We're actually getting these started. If we're doing it by seed, technically we should have already had them going. If you have good seed starting setup, you could maybe still squeeze in some plants, maybe. But we've got to have these things in the ground by mid-August to late August. We've got to have that window of opportunity dialed in, because if we don't, we're going to grow just like people do in the fall. They'll plant mid-March to even sometimes after Easter, and then they're the first people that come back with zero production because it's now gotten too hot, it's too humid, plant's flowering, the plant looks beautiful, but now the pollen is sticky. Tomatoes are self-pollinating, peppers are self-pollinating, they don't rely on bee pollination. We can't hand pollinate them like we can cucurbits or melons and squash. So we've got to get it right. So we need these growing healthy. So as soon as the temperatures drop, when we move into September and we start getting flowers, that we can actually set fruit. Our window for setting fruit is shorter in the fall time, but it's actually simpler for growing, in my opinion, and not enough people give it a shot because they miss the timing. But the pest pressure is much lower in the fall because we're growing into the cool season and not into the hot season.
Question real quick. When they're that size, or I know when get them in, where do you put them during this hot weather if you're buying them and starting them now? I don't mean seed, but I mean size.
I try to keep mine like in wherever I can, like in a shady area where it's getting only morning sun. If you don't have an area, my encouragement is to find a way to set up some small, no, you don't need a greenhouse because a greenhouse is too hot, but create you something where you can throw up a shade cloth. Shade cloth is, if you've ever walked in mine over there, it's still humid as hell in there, but it's incredibly different in temperature. Water retention is much better. So it's a lot simpler. So just set yourself up for something. It doesn't have to be big. For me, I'm only growing maybe one tray of seedlings of things that I might if I'm starting seeds. So I don't need some big elaborate setup. But I'll grow them and I'll size them up. Like right now, we don't normally ever plant this early, but we've been getting a few. But if I had them this early, I'd be growing them, up potting them, and keeping them in a small spot where they're getting filtered sunlight, where they can grow and get a nice root system. So when they move out, they're more established. they're ready to go, less chance of getting transplant shock. They're a little bit more acclimated to the heat. So one of the things that we're in a limbo period too, so we're moving out of spring, we're moving into fall. So how many of you still have plants in the garden that look like garbage that really aren't doing anything?
Yeah.
So
That's
are
where
there,
I got cantaloupes growing.
yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of stuff that can still grow and still fine, but this is the time of the year when people they're just hanging on to stuff that doesn't need to be hung on to. It's like the garage full of junk that you just can't bring yourself to get rid of.
The
Like,
zinnias are still
Yeah.
growing. Still looks, it's looking all kind of sad.
yeah,
2 little branches and some,
you know,
maybe some leaves left and a couple of buds. That's it.
yeah, and you know, and even if you had fruit, you may only have a couple left.
Yeah.
So at some point in this process, you have to let go of these plants that you're still watering and putting time and energy into, because they're not going to give us anything, and they're also just feeding the pest and disease pressure. So if we're hanging on to some of these tomato plants, it's really humid, it's really hot, it's crazy raining outside, so the moisture is there. That's the perfect conditions for blight disease. So we might get blight on a plant that's not even going to give us anything back. And now we have it in our soil. Now we've created a condition that can affect our other plants if we're not using good practices. So if you still have things lingering on that really aren't, there's not enough left to give back to you, but I encourage you when you go home today or tomorrow before it gets hot, cut it off.
Very large tomato
Yeah.
plant that probably planted it, but I mean it's pretty big. Doesn't look that bad.
You know, and if it can overwinter or over summer, and it still looks good and doesn't look diseased, you know, it will produce again, but it's getting through the next 6 weeks.
I got it to give me anything yet.
Yeah, it's so when you're dealing like in spring, like my rule of thumb for planting in springtime so that I don't miss the window of opportunity, because once the nighttime temps are above 75 or daytime temps get like in the low to mid 90s, you will no longer set fruit. Your plants will flower like crazy, but they will never set fruit. And so you're like, what am I doing wrong? You're not doing anything wrong. Nature says you're too late. You can't control that. So springtime, if you're growing again, my plants personally, they go in the ground middle of February to late February. And people are going to look at me like, oh, it's too cold. It's too cold. I would rather waste my time protecting them and setting up some PVC hoops that are super cheap to make and covering them with frost cloth, because they make it through every single cold snap that we get. And then I have plants that are ready. I'm done with production by the time the pests set in. I'm done with production by the time it gets too hot. And then there's all the other people that are trying to figure out how to make it through the most stressful time. So prepare yourself with systems to protect them when it's cool, and eliminate all the other things that you deal with that everybody else is dealing with that they shouldn't have to. That's why timing, if you don't take anything else away from here today, timing is everything. You know, August 15th to August 31st for fall, February 15th to March 15th is my ultimate window. No later than that. Like if I don't have them in by then, I planted mine late this year, but I also got the first pest problem I've had in a long time. And I still got a good production, but eventually I was like, okay, we're done. No more. There's still tomatoes on there. They're gone. I don't want to mess with this anymore. So if you go home and you find some things that you want to get rid of, you can cut them off, chop them down. Then it's time to look at what's going in these places next. And what do I need to do to get ready? Most people, when they get out there in their garden, they get ready to amend and get the soil prepped right when it's time to put the plant in the ground. 9 times out of 10, people are buying a plant, fertilizer, compost, and amendments all at once. There's only a small problem with that. You know, that's okay if I was my grandfather way back in, who's using a lot of synthetic inputs, you know, like traditional garden fertilizers like triple 13s and, you know, osmocotes and such. They don't require soil life to break down nutrients. But as a natural gardener that's very soil focused and is trying to keep healthy soil, because that's how I mitigate pest disease and wasting a lot of my time and being able to be successful, I need my fertilizer to be able to be broken down. I'm relying on invisible microorganisms that I can't see to break things down. How many of us have a compost pile at all in any form or fashion? That's exactly what's happening in the compost pile. They're breaking down and creating and cycling nutrients. So in an organic practicing or natural practicing garden, we're relying on that. So what I'm doing right now, I'm looking at my soil consistency first and foremost, especially with the weather that we're getting. It's hot, it's super wet, we're getting massive rains in very small amount of time. Is the soil consistency I have in my raised bed or my rows, can it handle this kind of moisture? If it's holding water or it's staying soggy and saturated, I need to work some drainage amendments in there before fall comes. I need to improve that. If it's not holding any water and I'm constantly, even with all this rain, if I'm constantly looking at it and it's dry and I'm having to come back and just water, now I need to add some organic matter in there to get that consistency to have some water holding capacity. So I can add some compost in. So I'll typically top off my raised beds at this time with a little bit of compost. I will work the top 8 to 10 inches. Usually for me it's about 6, but I do this by hand only with no mechanical tilling, and I'm not like turning the whole bed over. All I'm doing is taking hand tools and I'm using even like a soil knife. I don't have one up here today, but I'll press it in, or I could take like a spade or a hand shovel, just gently pressing it in there and seeing, can I reach the bottom? Is it compacted? Do I have a good consistency? Can I take it in there and rock it back and forth and introduce oxygen to help keep this from getting compacted? Because what happens with the amount of rain we're getting, especially if we have beds or we don't plant densely and we have a lot of open area, water compacts your soil, especially when it comes down 6 inches in an hour at like terminal velocity, it feels like. We were talking about earlier, like my parking lot out here, that whole mud trap contraption is because of compaction. It's soft. We drove over it, we walked over it, we worked it essentially just by driving on it and walking on it, and that is what we're left with, is compaction. So now when it dries up, all the lower level, it's not going to take any more water anymore. It's just going to hold in that top layer, the low spots, and it's going to create further problems. So it just goes to show you that even like out in your yard, when we get the moisture we're getting, it's getting compacted, and the more we work it, we traffic over it, the poorer the soil gets, and in turn, the poorer the plants react to it over time. So just simply aerating with the most fundamental thing, like a broad fork style, which is a really old method, just, rocking back and forth, opening up some pockets. That helps microbes. Roots need to breathe. Microbes need to breathe just as much as they need water. I'm going to fertilize. I'm typically going to use a slow release organic. I'm going to do this ahead of planting because I need those microbes to break it down. I need the moisture to be active in there. This is going to help make nutrients available. And if I'm using a well-purposed organic, oftentimes it's going to come coupled with things that are going to feed microbes. It'll be fortified with things like carbons, humic acids, maybe hormones, minerals, all things that traditional garden fertilizers may have very minimalistic amounts of. So they're not really helping us long-term sustain our soil. This is also one of the most important times to mulch. Most people look at mulching as an aesthetical application because that's what the majority of it's done, is in landscaping and front of houses. But it's not to look good. It's to lock in moisture. It's to lock out heat this time of year. It's to help reduce soil temperature. Mulch is the equivalent of a shade cloth, so we're reducing temperature by a few degrees is massive. It will hold in the moisture, not excess moisture, but it's going to help keep some in there because we need our soil to stay damp so that it doesn't crack, so that nutrients become available. This is also going to help us retain nutrients. If the soil cracks a whole lot and then it gets really, really dry and becomes hydrophobic, water is going to move through it. It's not actually going to absorb and swell. Then our roots are going to have a hard time actually accessing nutrients, even though it seems like they're growing, and they may be growing just fine, but it doesn't mean they're getting those minute minerals and nutrients that they need. So we kind of already touched on seeding. Really we're too late for seeding. If we wanted to seed tomatoes and peppers, we need 6 to 8 weeks prior to planting. Same thing goes for eggplant, except it follows like in the spring, it follows a little bit later because it can handle more heat. I like to grow my eggplants into the summer because they hate March and beginning of April when it's cool and windy, but they love the summer heat. So one of the things that I like to do when I'm seeding or even planting these, I will use my okra and I'll plant them strategically shading my peppers to slightly extend my season and alleviate some sun stress because they get so much bigger. So it acts as a natural shade for some of those plants that don't like that real hot summer sun.
My problem was when I was growing peppers is that they would grow to maybe like 1.5 feet and start flowering and then make, peppers and John. And I'd have like 5 or 6 peppers on this tiny baby plant that can't support it, And so I'd like go around and pluck off the flowers, but then they grow some more. And before I know, and it's still a small plant. And I'm like, do they get big? I don't know.
It depends on the variety. If it's looking overwhelmed, then it's an imbalance of nutrients. So one of the most common things, if the plant is small and it's flowering a lot, that means it's getting a lot of the things that it needs to produce fruit, but it may not be getting enough nitrogen. So it's only growing compact growth. But on the other hand, if you oversupply nitrogen and you give it too much, then you're going to get lots of tall and green growth, and then you're going to get no flowering and fruit or reduced flowering and fruit. So it's finding a balance. That's one of the reasons why I love using like slow release organics, because I tend to have less fertilizer imbalance in there because I'm getting even feeding. Depending on what you're using, even things like Osmocotes that are time released, when you put it in 90-degree temperatures in full sun right now, the bottle says 3 to 4 month feed. It's a 1 month feed. And then you've depleted, and you don't know this because the package doesn't really tell you this. You don't get out there and you research it more, so you're not supplying enough nutrients. So when you're using something that is more natural oriented, it better works with the environment, and you have a little bit available consistency. My best analogy that I like to give is like using slow release nutrients that are truly slow release. It's like getting to choose from the buffet every day or eating fast food every day. You either just like gorge on this little bit of unhealthy stuff, or you have this lavish set of nutrients out there and you're able to get what you need from the soil. So I find that approach works better, and that's for me because I've done it all ways. And for somebody who doesn't have a lot of time, this approach has been the best as far as productivity. And sometimes I still suffer from the same problems, but when we are planting, one of the biggest things that we want to do, even more so than in spring, if you buy transplants from a nursery, pay close attention to what kind of setting they were in. So if you go to like the big box store, for instance, and you buy like a plant out of the front of Lowe's, which is in the smeltering concrete heat, it's already stressed. It's already acclimated to full sun, so it might do just fine. If you come and you buy something from somebody like me or other small nurseries who are trying to not stress the plant as much, it might be under partial shade. So I need to take it home and begin to look at where it came from and where it's going to go. And fall is really important with tomatoes and peppers because we're planting in the most extreme temperatures of the entire year so that we can have a plant survive to when it cools down. So acclimating, we can start off by introducing it to a little bit of sun, giving it filtered light, and then slowly over the course of a week or so, depending on what kind of time we have, acclimating it into the space that it's going to be going in, and that's going to reduce the chance of transplant shock. Do I do this? No, I don't ever have time for this. I like to pretend I do, but I don't. But I can tell you that it works, and it is worth its weight in gold, because what happens is you put these plants out there. If you're like me, I'll take this home, I'll throw it out. My garden is in somewhat shade, but it's still more sun than what they were getting. They're not acclimated, and they just sit there. They might sit there for a week and a half before I really started seeing anything happen. Well, that doesn't seem like a whole lot, but in the fall, when my window is so much shorter than spring, that's the difference between missing the window and getting what I wanted out of it and not. So acclimating your plants, getting them early, having them ready to go in and at the time, mid-August, late August, and being acclimated at that point is incredibly important. You can also, when you're transplanting, especially in the summer months, I highly recommend using some type of root stimulator, preferably seaweed based. Seaweed is full of natural minerals and hormones. Um, it's something that you can use when plants are kind of looking sad, almost like it's not a medicine, but it has tons of minerals. It has those natural hormones in it. It can help perk a plant back up when it's looking sad. If you want to do an experiment this fall, buy an extra 2 plants or take a cutting off something you have, like not a woody cutting, but a green cutting. Put one in a mason jar or a clear cup with water and one with just a minute little splash of liquid seaweed in that water and just watch what happens. The seaweed will develop at least twice the roots and how much healthier they are. It's incredible. And you think about doing that when you're transplanting these out and you're putting them in and you're watering them in for the first time and you're activating that plant with hormones and minerals, it's going to help reduce transplant shock. It's going to help the plant be healthier. You're going to have just a much better chance of success.
What type of, I know you probably can get it to you guys, but what are some of the seaweed based?
The only one that I carry is really because the only one I get that's easily accessible is the Microlife Super Seaweed. I think that's the best. Some places, if the supplier has it available, like Medina, their liquid seaweed is good. You want to make sure it's a reputable seaweed because somebody asked me like, hey, seaweed's prevalent along the coast, but it has to be desalinized. So you put.
I was wondering. I was like, can we just go to the beach, grab some?
You could, but you'll end up killing everything you have with salt. So it has to be processed, and it's not expensive, and it's not something. I view liquid seaweed as a tool on my tool belt. It's not something I use every single week. It's something that I keep a small bottle on hand. And when I'm planting out new plants, I use it when I have a plant that maybe has like a little bit of yellowing and I know it's not a watering issue. Maybe it's a mineral deficiency issue. That's where I go to first to see if I can perk it up without getting real specific. Because, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say, what was the name of the Microlife that you had?
It's called Super Seaweed. It's in a green bottle. Usually I have some up here.
Okay, I was just writing it down.
And you can use it on other plants.
You can use it on anything. You can use it on fully established plants, woody plants. There's nothing that it's not good for because you're putting minerals and nutrients back into the soil. So it's care is really not, like, to me, an important part of this talk. I mean, most of the things that I view in care is in your practices, like what you're actually doing on the most fundamental basics of growing. Number one, watering. When it comes to disease prevention and gardening, especially on tomatoes, there are 2 key preventatives. I'm going to take that back. There's 3. Number one is pruning from an early age. As you begin to plant these plants, we need to prune off lower limbs. We want to get this plant elevated. Even when it's mature, I don't want branches going real close to the ground. I want to entice airflow to move through it because this season has been one of the most prevalent in blight disease that I've seen. It's because it's been super wet. It got really hot really fast and really humid really fast. And if we let our plants trap warm, moist air up under the leaves, it becomes perfect habitat for disease. And then we couple that with watering. Now, watering is something that we can control only in what we do. How many of you water overhead? Anybody? Like, do you water over the top of the plant or just the soil?
I usually try to get the soil.
Okay. So you want to target your watering the soil. Plants can't absorb moisture through the leaves, through the stems. They can only absorb it through the roots. But moisture is also how common diseases like pathogens get started on plants. They start as a microbial pathogen in the soil, water splashes it onto the leaves, and then it begins to affect. And if you're an overhead waterer, you splash it, and then it moves from leaf to leaf, stem to stem. We even, as if we're pruning, if we prune and we go prune a healthy section and we pruned an unknown disease leaf, we've now spread it, or we've spread it from a diseased plant to a non-diseased plant. So when we're pruning, if we don't know, keep a little bit of alcohol with you. Make sure you're sanitizing your pruner in between cuts or plants to help mitigate that. Now, when we get rains like we get, there's not a lot we can do. We can't control water splashing and soil getting on the leaves. The best thing that we can do is keep our canopies elevated up, but also make sure that we have a nice mulch layer. Mulch layer is going to help keep the actual soil from splashing up into there. Microbes need soil. They don't necessarily live in the mulch. They don't want porous, rural, open areas. They want soil where they can feed, they can attach to root systems, and they can work symbiotically with the plants. You can do traditional like composted hardwood mulch. It's got to be composted, no big chunky bark, because that will pull nitrogen away from your plants, and then your plants will become stunted. My go-to for garden mulch is pine straw. Pine straw is very easy to fluff. It's very easy to let air through it. Moisture gets through it really, really well. And also it does a very, very, very superior job of keeping moisture off leaves because it rolls off and goes right back down to the soil. I especially like it on like leafy plants like cucurbits, squash, melon. Easy way when you're planting young plants to keep those young leaves off the soil so they're not getting those types of leaf diseases right out of the gate. But it will help prevent splashing up under there. It breaks down well, and I've found overall that it's been the superior as far as weed suppression. My home garden gets very, very minimalistic weeds growing in it at all, and just keep it nice and fluffed up in there. And when it breaks down, I just replenish it.
What do you think of shredded leaves? Because I know that's what we do.
I think like for me, it just depends on the type and the size. I kind of have this also coupled with that because most of my garden is under oak canopy. So I have leaves abundantly. They're all over the place, and I do not remove them out of the beds. They just fall naturally. But it would depend. Like I think like doing it, but also depending on if they're large leaves, breaking them down a little bit, or they're a little bit more compact so they can actually be broken down by microbes. Because if you have big stuff, I used to get magnolia leaves. Those I would get out of there because they would never break down. I'd dig back 6 months later and still find them buried in the soil. And that is taking away from your nutrients. Your microbes are using nitrogen to essentially try to compost and break down these large chunky matters of things. And then that nitrogen could be being used by my plants in the soil for what I'm actually trying to do. So, yeah, I mean, if they're smaller, I think it's perfect. Yeah. If they're more like shredded, just not like massive.
Does
Yeah.
the pine straw make it change the acidity? That's what I've heard, and that's why I haven't used it.
Pine straw is not proven to change the acidity to any amount that would be detrimental more than anything else. I feel like I would have a better chance changing the soil acidity by using a synthetic fertilizer that's high in phosphorus than I would using pine straw.
Okay.
But also, we can do all these things, but if we're not checking our pH in our soil once or twice a year, just for the heck of it, then we are flying blind. This is something that like we can put all the nutrients we want into the soil, but if the pH isn't in the optimal zone for the plants we're growing, those nutrients are like bricks. They can't be utilized.
So it's like a soil test.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever done that in my entire life.
So just think about this. How popular is when you go to the corner store, the grocery store. Half the aisle of water is alkaline based water. Okay, for health reasons, like to help balance the pH in your body. I don't know anything about this really, but it's just point being is that nutrients are moved through pH balance. Happens in human body. It changes even in like swimming pools. That's why we test pH, because nutrients and organic matter changes, and that's how algae gets growing. Certain things can grow in things. Same thing happens in soil. If our pH isn't right, then things are not usable. So if we test our pH right now in the middle of summer, we're testing our pH for spring. We're not testing it for fall, because nothing we're going to be able to do to change our pH if we need to make an adjustment is going to be instantaneous if we're doing it the right way. So I usually like to check twice a year. I'll check beginning of the year and summer. That way I can start making adjustments if I need to, no matter how micro or macro I need to make, so that I'm moving my soil to the realm it needs to be in for the upcoming season. You know, I can still be successful growing something even if it's off a little bit, but I want to be conscious of it because I might be putting things in there that are contributing to the problem, and then I'm making it worse. And before you know it, nothing's doing well, and then it's a lot more work to get it back where you need it to be. Supplemental fertilization, by that I mean we're going to focus on fertilizing the soil with a slow release, but as we grow, we can supplement with liquid fertilizers, things that are going to give us instant nutrition. It's like having an energy drink. It's not going to stay in the soil. It's giving your plant accessibility to fast acting nutrients. It's a way to help plants that are stressed. It's a way to help plants that are beginning to maybe flower. If I use the right nutrient set, I can promote healthier flowers, bigger blooms, bigger fruit. Whereas I might use something nitrogen based in the early stages to help my plant grow and get to the size that I want it to before stopping and then focusing on flowering and reproduction. So you can use liquids, but one liquid does not, there's no one size fits all. You know, it's kind of, let's talk about have a toolkit. You know, one to two things, maybe three things that you can have and use them based upon the life of the plant. And it can definitely help. I do minimal supplementation. I just do it as like, oh, I got time to do it today, and the plant's in this stage. Here it goes. It's not a necessity if you're doing a really, really focused soil diet and soil fertilization. You can get away without liquids at all. If you are container growing, though, I will say liquids are indispensable. Like, you're burning through nutrients much faster in a container or a pot. You're washing them out because it's drying out faster. They're definitely almost a must for me in that sense, especially with tomatoes. If I'm not providing something with calcium, I'm going to get blossom end rot really, really fast, which we'll talk about here in a bit. So obviously we have all kinds of pests. There's plenty more than this up here, but these are the ones that like I find that most people complain about.
I've seen all of them. They're all in my garden, every one of them.
So the first one up
Including
here,
squirrels.
tomato hornworm, or also sometimes we have tobacco hornworms. They look very similar. They are a wonderful pollinator. They make the coolest moth you've ever seen. They're massive. But obviously, if they are destroying our plant, we don't want them. I typically find in my garden that if I get hornworms, it's usually a latter season problem, and that most of the time if I plant it early, I'm finding them whenever I'm on the downhill slide of production. I don't spray anything with these guys. These guys are too easy to find. They're too easy to hand pick and eliminate. I don't like spraying even organic things like BT unless I have to, because I also have an immense amount of pollinator and butterfly friendly plants all in the garden, and overspray, microparticle spray could be damaging those things that are literally right next door to each other. Now there are some times with worms, like this year, like the striped worms are really, really bad for me. I fought them all season long. This is the first time I've sprayed anything in probably 2.5 years. I sprayed once or twice and they still just kept coming, and eventually I just gave up, and I harvested what I could get, and you know, they got what they wanted. I still got enough, to say the least. But you kind of have to weigh out your options. You know, look at where your plant is and determine whether or not it's worth actually spraying or just getting rid of the plant. Oftentimes I find most of the time when the pressure is the worst, I've gotten most of what I want, and it's just not worth my time. Stink bugs, obviously, that's the number one tomato enemy. Your number one defense against stink bugs is planting early. That's the number one reason why I plant mine in spring and February and not mid-March to April. Because if I can beat the heat and I can have most of my production setting on there by June, I can get them. I found this year, this is the first year I planted a little later than normal. I had them everywhere for the first time in 4 years. Um, and I still was able to get the mass majority of my production. I ended up having to pick most of my tomatoes as soon as I saw them begin to blush. So they really weren't at optimal flavor. They probably could have been better tasting, but it's the difference between getting blistered, rotting tomatoes by the time I get them inside and I'm ready to process them, or letting them table ripen and getting something. So you still can't save them. I can honestly say with the amount of stink bugs we had, I did not lose that many after we picked them and brought them inside to actual stink bug damage. Um, number one defense for stink bugs, there's no spray or chemical that's going to help you. The soapy water trick, knocking them off into a bucket of soapy water works. It is laborsome. I prefer the hand vac method. It's faster. And it's a silly concept, but if you can suck them up, dump them into soapy water, and kill them instantly with the surfactants in the soap, every single one, especially when they're in this nymph phase that you can remove from your garden, is one less stink bug to create a new generation later on. And stink bugs are multi-generational. You'll have many generations in a season, so they're very, very prolific. So removing them from the environment, as many as we can throughout the season, even after our tomatoes are gone, if we see them and we remove them, we're eliminating that many more that may overwinter in our locale and come back next year. Doesn't mean we're not going to have them. Just means if we put pressure on them, we're going to alleviate the pressure they're putting on us in some facet. Aphids to me, it's such a common problem, not only on peppers, but on a lot of ornamentals. But the key thing about aphids are an immediate indicator that your plant is missing some form of nutrient. So it is proven, if you look at a scale of sugars within a plant, the higher the Brix level in a plant, the more types of pests they can fend off. So aphids are sap-sucking or sugar feeders. They feed off certain types of sugars from a plant. And they're always centralized around new growth, where most of the sugars are being pushed on. They're around blooms. They're around like fruiting areas. That's why if you look like on a hibiscus or a flowering plant, they're always where the blooms are, because that's where all the good stuff's at. So we've done experiments at home, not in our vegetable garden, because we never really have aphids in the vegetable garden anymore, but I always get them in my potted flowers, like my hibiscus. I've taken and moved back from spraying and then experimented with just using a liquid organic fertilizer and drenching on an every 2-week basis, and I've watched the aphids come and go. Plant gets stressed again, they come back. I feed it some more, they start disappearing. And by doing that, in lieu of using a pesticide, and I'm helping keep the soil healthy, I'm giving the plant its ability to have natural defenses. The plant is pesticide free. So for the first time in my life, I've actually had ladybugs come and go as well, and come specifically in, feed. When the problem went away, so did they, rightfully so, because they've got to eat too. But it just goes to show you that if you're fostering a natural environment, a lot of times nature will help take care of itself. And so most all your pest problems, except those top two, they're inevitable. They just happen. Tomatoes are a host plant for this particular sphinx moth. Stink bugs are just stink bugs. But a lot of pests, especially sugar-sucking pests, are indicators that there is a soil problem. That soil does not have all the nutrients your plants need to be optimally healthy. It might be producing good, it might be looking good, everything to us looks fine, but it's a way your plant says, hey, help me out here, give me something extra.
Do aphids always look like that?
No, they can be orange, they can be black, they're very, very tiny, they can be many, many, many colors.
Yeah, because when I planted in my container, I did the Juliet tomato, and then I put basil and marigolds with it, and all over the bottoms of the basil after it started blooming up, but they were black and then sometimes like a smoky gray color.
Yep, they can be many colors.
Okay.
And
I was trying to figure out what it was.
And now I'm not saying that I've not researched or proven that my theory that like feeding higher is a foolproof solution, but scientifically it makes sense. But I do this and it works. It's important because aphids are an asexual insect. So that means every female aphid that is born is already born pregnant. So when you start seeing 1 or 2 aphids and then you don't do anything at all and you go out a week later, it's like they're everywhere. That's because they're rapid reproducers, you know, and
Spider mites. I have had really bad spider mites.
We get those
This year.
too.
I'm not super versed on spider mites, but I think I think it follows along kind of the same principles, like soil health first, plant health second. You know, because it's a cycle,
Yeah.
and that's where it's one of the reasons why I started doing these classes, because I felt like as I learned myself that I felt like all the portions of growing things, they're interlocked. They all rely on each other, and each one has an effect on the other. And I felt that from waiting on people and helping people figure out problems all these years, that most people, all their problems were disconnected. You know, they weren't looking at the bigger picture, and it's become easier. Squirrels, you know, I genuinely don't have.
Squirrels, man.
I have I mean, our whole garden is under trees. There's squirrels everywhere. I have more problems with them digging up plants, burying crud in my garden than I do having them eat my tomatoes. But I also have other things they prefer. Like they ate all my blackberries this year. Every single one of them.
Tree, and they ate every single
You know, I mean, it's kind of like they didn't mess with anything else. So it was like, maybe next year I'll plant more blackberries, you know. So I don't know. We'll see. But it's kind of one of those things like you have to understand you can't control wildlife. You know, if they're that big of a nuisance and they are doing damage, you know, figure out some simple way. Like that's another reason why I do like the PVC hoops for like cold weather protection. I couple that with netting, and I make it where I can easily flop it over, and I'm not having to like have a hassle of getting in there. But I do something to make sure I'm getting what I want. We've talked somewhat about this already. The 2 diseases that I'm going to focus on today are early and late blight. This year, with the weather conditions, they're definitely prominent. They come, they're soil borne. The thing to know about early and late blight is once you get them on a plant, if you replant your plant in that same spot, you know, tomorrow, a year from now, you are very likely going to get that same disease again. This is why, even on the smallest scale of gardening, that crop rotation is extremely important. This is how even large-scale agriculture, if they're growing multi-crops, or they rotate fields, because if they don't, they're going to build up disease and pest pressure to a level that they cannot control. And then even with pesticides, fungicides, you still are not going to be successful. So I got some form of a leaf disease this season for the first time in one bed. I will not be planting my tomatoes in there again until maybe next year. I'm going to plant them in other beds, maybe one here, one there. I always scatter my stuff about anyway to help mitigate disease, because what happened this time, I didn't prune well. I didn't have good airflow. I got disease on the plant that was the closest to the hottest sun, and then it slowly spread to the other 2. So, and that was because poor pruning practices, poor airflow, just poor practices on my part. So I still make some of these same mistakes all the time.
How long before, like, if you've gotten like blight on your tomato plant? I only have one garden spot, and then I just put a little small thing in the back. But mostly, I've been planting in the same garden spot since COVID when I started gardening.
Yeah.
But so how long do you gotta wait before that soil's good to plant tomatoes again?
It's hard to say. I mean, because it's a living thing, it's a pathogen. It can survive a long time. But even in a sense like that, if you're not growing a mass amount of tomatoes, what I do, like if I got to a position like here, maybe because some of my beds have staples that are there, they've been there for 5 years, like rosemary. Like I've got a passion vine for fertility caterpillars. I've got all kinds of things that don't come out. So like I don't have a bed that's completely empty, and I can't just take one bed and move it to the other. That's a design flaw. But what I will do is I will take, if I'm only growing 3-4 tomatoes, I might take one season off or 1 year off, and I might just container grow them, put them in a few pots and grow what I need, and still be able to get what I want, and letting that soil rest and grow other things in it. Continue to put good things in there that support good microbe like good microbes that will actually act as predators towards the bad ones. That's if you're fostering a good soil environment, good fungi, good bacteria, just like, people eat other animals, people are animals, microbes eat other microbes. It's the same thing. So over time, the soil can correct itself, but you can't just, there's no way to know for sure. We're not going to get out there with a microscope and be able to identify, oh, there's the blight still here. So it's hard to say, but just if you have the ability, or if you grow your space any bit, even on a small scale, even having the ability to flip flop, this season I plant this here, next season I plant it here, and you can just flip flop your layout. That's better than doing absolutely nothing at all, And there's some people out there. I watched my grandfather plant some of the same stuff in the same row forever, and sometimes he failed, sometimes he succeeded, but he could have been more successful if he would have had a succession layout, even in a row garden.